October the 24th, 1944, deep in the Vosges Mountains of eastern France. The silence was wrong. First Lieutenant Marty Higgins of the 141st Infantry Regiment had led men through enough combat to recognize the particular quality of quiet that precedes catastrophe. Around him, 275 American soldiers from the 1st Battalion occupied a narrow ridge barely wide enough for two men to walk abreast. Dense pine forest pressed in from all sides, the trees so thick that visibility extended maybe 30 yards on a good day. Today wasn't a good day. Fog clung to the mountain slopes like wet wool, and a cold rain had been falling for 3 days straight. They had pushed too far. Higgins knew it. His senior officers had known it. The decision to order them to advance 4 miles beyond the nearest friendly troops came from Major General General Dahlquist, commander of the 36th Infantry Division, despite warnings from subordinate officers about the risk. The objective had seemed clear enough on the maps back at division headquarters. Secure the right flank. Capture high ground overlooking the German supply routes. Maintain pressure on the retreating enemy. Standard American doctrine in the fall of 1944. Keep moving forward. Don't let the Germans consolidate. Press the advantage. But the Vosges Mountains didn't care about American doctrine. This wasn't the open fields of Normandy or even the difficult terrain of Italy. The Vosges were something different entirely. Steep ridges covered in ancient forest rose nearly 4,000 feet above sea level. Narrow logging roads, now churned to liquid mud by autumn rains, were the only routes through the mountains. The Germans had prepared defensive positions on every viable approach, turning the natural fortress into a maze of interlocking kill zones. Pillboxes built from logs and earth blended seamlessly into the forest. Machine gun nests covered every clearing. Mines and booby traps waited beneath fallen leaves. And the Germans defending this ground weren't rear echelon troops or the old men and boys of Volkssturm units. These were veterans of the 716th Infantry Division, reinforced by elements of the 244th Infantry Division. Men who knew how to fight. In the days leading up to October the 24th, the 141st Infantry had clawed forward through the German defenses, suffering casualties with every yard gained. But they kept pushing because those were the orders. On October the 24th, Higgins and his battalion reached their objective, a ridgeline designated on the maps with nothing more than an elevation number. They had done it. Against all odds, despite the terrain and the weather and the Germans, they had seized the high ground. That's when the silence came. The German artillery that had been harassing them all day suddenly stopped. The sporadic rifle fire that had crackled through the trees fell away to nothing. Based on survivors' accounts, the trap became evident when German forces began their encirclement, cutting off the battalion's escape routes. The sound of enemy movement through the forest behind them signaled that something had gone terribly wrong. Within hours, the situation became brutally clear. German forces had infiltrated through the gaps in the American line, cutting the 1st Battalion off from the rest of the 141st Infantry. The narrow logging road they had used to advance was now blocked by German positions. Every attempt to send runners back to friendly lines ended in machine gun fire or capture. They were surrounded. Completely, utterly surrounded. 275 American soldiers, most of them young men from Texas, sitting on a useless piece of ridge in the middle of enemy territory with no way out. The German commanders, watching from their positions, understood what they had accomplished. For weeks, American forces had been pushing them back through the Vosges, giving them no time to rest or reorganize. Now, finally, they had turned the tables. An entire American battalion was trapped, running low on ammunition and medical supplies, cut off from reinforcement. The Germans could take their time. They held the high ground on 3 sides. Their artillery had the ridge precisely ranged. All they had to do was wait and let hunger, cold, and artillery do the work. Back at 36th Division headquarters, Major General Dahlquist faced the consequences of his decision. His own officers had warned him against the advance. The intelligence reports had shown heavy German concentrations in the area. The terrain favored defense, not attack. But Dahlquist had ordered the push anyway, and now 275 of his men were paying the price. He had to get them out. The question was, how? The first rescue attempt came from the 141st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalions. They were the logical choice. Same regiment, familiar with the terrain, already in position. They attacked on October the 25th, trying to fight their way up the same logging roads the 1st Battalion had used. The Germans were ready. Machine guns opened up from concealed positions. Artillery walked back and forth across the narrow approaches. Mortar rounds fell among the advancing Americans with devastating accuracy. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions fought with everything they had, but the mathematics of terrain and defensive firepower were unforgiving. By nightfall on October 25th, they had made minimal progress at a cost of heavy casualties. The Lost Battalion remained out of reach. Above the trapped men, P-47 Thunderbolt fighters from the 405th Fighter Squadron attempted to drop supplies. Flying through terrible weather and German anti-aircraft fire, the pilots performed near miracles of precision flying, skimming the treetops to drop packages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. But the ridge was so narrow and the forest so thick that most packages missed their target. Some landed among the Germans, who gratefully accepted the American rations. Others crashed through the trees and were lost. A few made it through to the trapped battalion, but nowhere near enough. On the ridge, conditions deteriorated by the hour. The rain continued without pause. Men crouched in hastily dug foxholes that filled with water as fast as they could bail. At night, temperatures dropped near freezing. The wounded, and there were dozens of them, lay in makeshift aid stations with inadequate shelter and dwindling medical supplies. Supplies of food and water rapidly became scarce as the Germans maintained their siege. German artillery pounded the ridge at irregular intervals, making sleep impossible and adding to the casualty count. Men began to wonder if anyone was coming at all. By October the 26th, the situation had become desperate. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions were fought out, having suffered staggering casualties for minimal gains. The Germans showed no signs of weakening their grip. The trapped battalion had been without adequate food or water for 3 days. The wounded were dying for lack of proper medical care. Major General Dahlquist needed a unit capable of accomplishing the impossible. He needed soldiers who would fight with absolute determination regardless of casualties. He needed the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The men of the 442nd had earned barely a day and a half of rest. For the previous 9 days, they had been engaged in some of the most brutal fighting of the entire war, liberating the French towns of Bruyères and Bifontaine from German occupation. The battles had been vicious, close-quarters affairs fought house to house through rubble and ruins. The 442nd had prevailed, but at tremendous cost. The unit that pulled back from the line on October 23rd was exhausted, depleted, and in desperate need of rest and replacement. They had just begun to clean their weapons, eat hot food, and sleep in something other than muddy foxholes when the orders arrived. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team would conduct a relief operation to rescue the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry. They would attack at first light on October 26th. There would be no additional rest period, no time for replacements to arrive. They would go into battle under strength, already exhausted, against German positions that had repelled every previous rescue attempt. To understand what made this order particularly bitter, you have to understand who the men of the 442nd were. The unit was composed entirely of Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans. 2/3 had volunteered from Hawaii, where Japanese Americans had never been subjected to mass incarceration. The remaining third had volunteered from behind the barbed wire of American internment camps. Think about that for a moment. While these men trained at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, learning how to fight and die for their country, their families were imprisoned in camps scattered across the American West. not accused of any crime, not charged with any offense, imprisoned solely because of their ancestry. Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt in February 1942, had declared the entire West Coast a military zone and authorized the removal of anyone considered a security threat. In practice, this meant every person of Japanese descent, citizen or not, was given days to dispose of their property and report for relocation. Over 110,000 people, 2/3 of them American citizens, were forced into hastily constructed camps in desolate locations. Manzanar in the California desert, Hart Mountain in Wyoming, Poston in Arizona. They lived in tar paper barracks with no privacy, communal toilets, and minimal health care. They had done nothing wrong. They were imprisoned simply for being Japanese. And from these camps, young men volunteered to fight for America. When the Army opened recruitment for the 442nd in early 1943, they expected perhaps 3,000 volunteers from across the country. From the internment camps, about 1,500 stepped forward. From Hawaii, where no mass incarceration had occurred, over 10,000 volunteered. The Army had called for 1,500. They got 10 times that number. Why did they volunteer? The reasons were as varied as the men themselves. Some believed that military service would prove Japanese-American loyalty beyond question. Others wanted to fight fascism and defend democracy, even as democracy failed them at home. Some sought to honor family members who had immigrated from Japan and built lives in America. Many simply wanted to fight for the only country they had ever known, regardless of how that country had treated them. They trained together at Camp Shelby from spring 1943 through spring 1944. The mainlanders and the Hawaiians didn't mix well at first. The Hawaiians called the mainlanders kotonks, supposedly the sound a mainland head made when it hit the ground during a fight. The mainlanders called the Hawaiians Buddha heads, for reasons lost to history. But the divisions faded as they trained together, suffered together, and gradually transformed from civilians into soldiers. Their motto was, "Go for broke," a Hawaiian pidgin phrase from craps games meaning to risk everything on a single bet. It was an appropriate motto for men who had everything to prove and nothing left to lose. They would stake their lives on the belief that courage in combat could overcome prejudice at home. The 442nd arrived in Italy in June 1944 and immediately joined with the 100th Infantry Battalion, another Nisei unit that had been fighting since September 1943. The 100th had already earned the nickname the Purple Heart Battalion for their devastating casualty rates. Together, the combined 100/442N fought through the Italian campaign with a ferocity that earned both fear and respect from German defenders. But nothing they had experienced in Italy compared to the Vosges. The terrain was worse, the weather more brutal, and the Germans more determined. When the 442nd arrived in France in October 1944, they were immediately thrown into the offensive to capture Bruyères. The battle lasted 6 days and cost the unit heavily. They had barely secured Bruyères when they were ordered to take the nearby town of Bifontaine. That battle was even worse, with the 100th Battalion nearly cut off and surrounded before being relieved. By October the 23rd, when they finally pulled back for rest, the 442nd had suffered hundreds of casualties. And now, less than 48 hours later, they were being sent back into combat to rescue a trapped battalion from a unit that wasn't even their own. The orders came down through the chain of command in the early morning hours of October the 25th. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller, commanding the 442nd, didn't waste time arguing. He knew what Dahlquist expected, and he knew his men would do it or die trying. The question wasn't whether they would attempt the rescue. The question was how many of them would survive it. The plan was straightforward in concept, nightmarish in execution. The 442nd would attack along multiple axes, trying to find weak points in the German defensive ring. The 100th Battalion would advance from the west. The 2nd Battalion would push from the south. The 3rd Battalion would strike from the southwest. The 522nd Field Artillery Battalion would provide fire support, though the thick forest limited their effectiveness. Engineers from the 232nd Combat Engineer Company would clear mines and obstacles. Every element of the 442nd would be committed to the fight. At 4 a.m. on October the 26th, the attack began. The Nisei soldiers moved forward through near-complete darkness. Veterans later described the conditions as extraordinarily challenging, with visibility so limited that men held on to the pack of the soldier in front of them to maintain contact. Rain fell in sheets. The temperature hovered just above freezing. The logging roads had become rivers of mud that sucked at boots and threatened to pull men under. And somewhere ahead in that darkness, German soldiers waited in prepared positions with machine guns, mortars, and artillery. The first contact came with the dawn. A German machine gun opened up from a concealed position, the distinctive rapid-fire stutter of an MG-42 tearing through the morning mist. Men hit the ground, returning fire. Grenades sailed through the trees. The position was overrun, but 50 yards farther on, another machine gun opened fire. Then another. The Germans had turned the forest into a maze of interlocking kill zones, each position covering the others. The 442nd pushed forward anyway. This wasn't the methodical, careful advance of troops trying to minimize casualties. This was something different. Men who had spent their entire lives being told they weren't truly American, whose families were imprisoned for looking like the enemy, who had everything to prove and nothing left to lose. They advanced into fire that should have stopped them cold. When one man fell, another took his place. When a position couldn't be flanked, they charged it head-on. Private First Class George Sakato of K Company watched his best friend get cut down by German machine gun fire. Something snapped inside him. Sakato, who had been born in California and volunteered from the internment camp at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, charged up the hill alone, firing his Thompson submachine gun from the hip. He killed 5 Germans and forced 4 more to surrender. When his platoon leader was killed, Sakato took command and led the counterattack that held the left flank. He would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions, though not until 2000, 56 years after the battle. Staff Sergeant Barney Hajiro of I Company led repeated attacks against German machine gun positions on October 29th. Under heavy fire, he destroyed 2 machine gun nests and captured 2 Germans. When his squad came under attack from yet another position, Hajiro charged it alone, killed 2 more Germans, and captured 4. He continued fighting for 3 straight days, destroying enemy positions and pulling wounded men to safety under fire. He too would receive the Medal of Honor, upgraded from a Distinguished Service Cross in 2000. The Germans defending the ridge had never encountered anything like this. These weren't regular American soldiers, moving cautiously and calling for artillery support at the first sign of resistance. The intensity of the Nisei attack stood out even in a war filled with desperate assaults. German after-action reports would later describe the Nisei tactics as relentless and determined beyond what they had previously encountered. What drove such fierce commitment was something the Germans, shaped by Nazi racial ideology, struggled to comprehend. Men fighting not just for victory, but for validation of their humanity and loyalty. The advance was measured in yards, not miles. Progress was agonizingly slow, each small gain purchased with blood. Men fell to machine gun fire, to artillery, to mines hidden beneath the forest floor. The medics worked without pause, treating wounds under fire, evacuating casualties through the mud and rain. The dead were left where they fell. There was no time for proper burial when the living still needed saving. By October 28th, the 442nd had been in continuous combat for 4 days with minimal sleep and inadequate food. Ammunition was running low. Casualties were mounting, but they were getting close. Patrols reported they could hear the trapped Texans calling for help less than a quarter mile away. The Germans knew it too and intensified their defensive fire. If the 442nd was going to break through, it would require one more push, one more day of charging into fire, one more sacrifice. October the 29th brought the climax of the battle. I Company, 442nd Infantry, had started the Vosges campaign with 185 men. K Company had begun with 186 men. After days of brutal combat, both units had been severely depleted. These shattered companies were ordered to make the final assault on the German positions blocking access to the Lost Battalion. They would have to advance across terrain swept by German machine guns, capture heavily defended positions, and break through to the trapped Americans beyond. The attack began at first light. I Company moved first, advancing through the trees in small groups. German fire came from everywhere, the crack of rifles, the chatter of machine guns, the shriek of incoming mortars. Men fell by the dozens. The company commander went down. Squad leaders died, but the advance continued. Those who remained kept moving forward, firing, throwing grenades, closing with the enemy. K Company followed, pushing through Y Company's casualties to hit the German positions from a different angle. The fighting devolved into close-quarters brutality. Hand-to-hand combat in the forest, men grappling with bayonets and rifle butts, grenades tossed at point-blank range. No tactics, no maneuver, just raw determination and violence. By day's end, both companies had been shattered. When the dust settled, I Company had just 8 men left unwounded out of the 185 who had started the campaign. K Company had 17 unwounded out of 186, but they had broken through. The German defensive line had cracked. The way to the Lost Battalion was open. On the morning of October 30th, 6 days after being surrounded, Lieutenant Marty Higgins and the survivors of the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry, heard American voices calling through the fog. Not German, American. Speaking English with accents Higgins had never heard before, but unmistakably American. Private Mutt Sakamoto of the 442nd was the first to reach the Lost Battalion's perimeter. He found exhausted, hollow-eyed men staring at him with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Sakamoto offered a cigarette to the nearest Texan. The man took it with shaking hands. "We're from the 442nd, Sakamoto said. "You're going home." Ed Guy, one of the rescued soldiers, later recalled the moment. "I might have hugged him, I don't know. I was just excited to get out of there." 211 men walked out of the trap. Of the original 275, those who didn't survive the ordeal or were too severely wounded to continue had paid the ultimate price. They staggered through the German positions the 442nd had destroyed, past the bodies of their rescuers, back toward friendly lines and safety. The 442nd had accomplished the impossible, but the cost made victory taste like ashes. Over 800 casualties. The exact number varies depending on the source. Some say 814, others claim as many as 1,000 when you count the men wounded in the days immediately after the rescue. But even the conservative estimates are staggering. More than 800 men killed or wounded to save 211. Do the math. Nearly 4 casualties for every man rescued. Companies reduced to squad strength. Battalions that could barely field a single company. A unit that had entered the Vosges campaign at near full strength reduced to a skeleton force in less than 2 weeks of combat. And the reward for this sacrifice? General Dahlquist ordered them to keep fighting. No rest, no replacements, no relief. The 442nd spent another 9 days in the Vosges, securing additional territory, taking more casualties, dying for ground that held no strategic value. It wasn't until November the 9th that they were finally pulled from the line. On November the 12th, General Dahlquist ordered the 442nd to assemble for a parade review. He wanted to personally thank them for rescuing the Lost Battalion and award decorations to the unit. The surviving members of the 442nd formed up in ranks, standing at attention in their mud-stained uniforms. Dahlquist arrived expecting to see thousands of men. Instead, he saw a few hundred. He looked at the formation with visible irritation. Where were his men? Where was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team? A colonel stepped forward. "Sir, this is all we have left." The general didn't understand. This couldn't be the entire unit. Where were the other battalions? Where were the companies? "Sir," the colonel repeated, "this is what's left of the 442nd. The unit that had gone into the Vosges with over 2,000 combat effectives now numbered perhaps 600 men capable of standing in formation. The rest were dead or wounded or still being carried off the mountains on stretchers. Dahlquist had used them like ammunition, expending them freely to accomplish his objectives. The parade review became a wake. From the German perspective, the rescue of the Lost Battalion represented a failure of intelligence and a fundamental misreading of their enemy. The German officers had believed, based on Nazi racial ideology, that non-white troops would be inferior soldiers. The Japanese Americans of the 442nd shattered that assumption with extreme prejudice. German after-action reports described the Nisei attacks as fanatical, relentless, and without regard for casualties. They couldn't understand what drove these men to fight with such fury, but the 442nd understood. They were fighting for something the Germans couldn't comprehend, the chance to prove that loyalty and courage had nothing to do with the color of your skin or the shape of your eyes. Every German position they overran, every machine gun nest they destroyed, every yard of ground they took was a repudiation of the racism that had imprisoned their families. The Germans saw fanaticism. The Nisei knew it was desperation mixed with determination. They had one chance to prove America wrong about Japanese Americans, and they were willing to die for it. The 442nd continued fighting until the end of the war in Europe. They would participate in the Gothic Line campaign in Italy, the liberation of Dachau concentration camp, and countless other battles. By the time the unit was deactivated in 1946, approximately 14,000 men had served in the 442nd and 100th Battalion combined. Of those, 9,486 earned Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. That's a casualty rate of nearly 68%. The unit had to be rebuilt almost 3 times during less than 2 years of combat. The awards and decorations read like something from fiction. 21 Medals of Honor, though most weren't awarded until 2000, when a review determined that racial prejudice had prevented Nisei soldiers from receiving their due recognition during the war. 52 Distinguished Service Crosses, many also upgraded to Medals of Honor in 2000. 1 Distinguished Service Medal, 588 Silver Stars, plus 28 oak leaf clusters representing second awards, 5,200 Bronze Star medals, 9,486 Purple Hearts, and 7 Presidential Unit Citations, the highest award a unit can receive. No other unit in American military history of any size or service duration earned more decorations. But the true legacy of the 442nd wasn't measured in medals. It was measured in the slow change they helped force on American society. When Japanese Americans returned from internment camps after the war, they found a nation that had begun, however grudgingly, to recognize their sacrifice. The soldiers of the 442nd became living proof that loyalty couldn't be determined by ancestry. Their service didn't erase racism. Discrimination against Japanese Americans continued for decades, but it created cracks in the edifice of prejudice. In 1962, Texas Governor John Connally made all members of the 442nd honorary Texans in recognition of their rescue of the Lost Battalion. The irony was thick enough to cut. Men whose families had been imprisoned without trial being honored by a state that had only recently begun to dismantle Jim Crow laws. But the gesture mattered. The survivors of the Lost Battalion never forgot who had saved them. Lieutenant Marty Higgins, who commanded the trapped battalion, remained deeply connected to the story of the rescue and worked to ensure it wasn't forgotten. The bond between the rescued Texans and their Japanese-American rescuers lasted generations. In 2009, surviving members of both units held a reunion in Houston, Texas. old men in their 80s and 90s embraced, remembering a week in October 1944 when loyalty and courage transcended race. The Lost Battalion rescue remains one of the most studied and debated episodes in military history. Historians still argue whether Dahlquist's decision to use the 442nd constituted sound tactical judgment or outright racism. Some contend the 442nd was chosen because they were simply the best unit available, men who had proven they could accomplish missions other units couldn't. Others argue that Dahlquist saw the Nisei soldiers as expendable, that he sacrificed them freely because they weren't his troops and because their deaths mattered less to him than the lives of white soldiers. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Dahlquist needed a unit capable of sustained offensive action regardless of casualties. The 442nd had demonstrated exactly that capability in previous battles. But it's also true that he used them more ruthlessly than his other units, pushed them harder, and demanded more of them than he would have asked from white soldiers in similar circumstances. When Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Purcell, commander of the 3rd Battalion, 442nd Infantry, protested the continued offensive after the rescue, Dahlquist's response was telling, "Keep them going and don't let them stop." One war correspondent who covered the battle later wrote, "General Dahlquist used the Nisei more ruthlessly than his own troops, pushing them into death traps day after day to reach the Lost Battalion of his 36th Division." At a 1982 military ceremony, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Singles, who commanded the 100th Battalion, was introduced to Dahlquist. The general extended his hand with a smile. "Let bygones be bygones. It's all water under the bridge, isn't it?" Singles kept his hand at his salute, refusing to shake. He maintained proper military protocol, but couldn't bring himself to shake hands with the man who had, in his view, needlessly sacrificed so many of his soldiers. According to reports, Singles could not mention Dahlquist's name without visible anger, even years after retiring. The Lost Battalion rescue encapsulates the central paradox of the Japanese-American experience in World War II. Men fighting for a country that had imprisoned their families, proving their loyalty to a nation that questioned their allegiance, dying for freedom they themselves were denied. The 442nd didn't go for broke in the Vosges Mountains because they believed in America's promises. They went for broke because they refused to accept America's prejudices. Every man who charged those German machine guns, every soldier who fell in the mud and rain, every family that received a telegram reporting their son killed in action, knew the bitter irony. They were dying to prove they deserved rights that should have been theirs by birth. The Constitution guaranteed equal protection under the law. Executive Order 9066 had suspended that protection based solely on ancestry. The men of the 442nd earned back with blood what should never have been taken away. In 2010, Congress awarded the 442nd Regimental Combat Team the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors America can bestow. President Barack Obama presented the medal to surviving members and family representatives. In his remarks, Obama noted, "You are loyal not to a place, not to a person, but to an idea that says we are all created equal." But the men who had fought in the Vosges knew that America's founding ideals and America's actual practices often diverged. They had lived that divergence in internment camps and segregated units, in the casual racism they encountered even in uniform, in the medals they earned but weren't awarded because of their race. They fought anyway, not because America had earned their loyalty, but because they believed in what America could become. Today, the rescue of the Lost Battalion stands as one of the defining moments in American military history. Not because of tactical brilliance or strategic significance, the operation was a costly, brutal slugging match that accomplished little of military value. It stands as a testament because of what it revealed about courage, loyalty, and the price of proving one's humanity to a skeptical nation. 275 men were trapped on a ridge in the Vosges Mountains in October 1944. 211 walked out. They owed their lives to soldiers who had every reason to let them die. Men whose families were imprisoned by the same government they were fighting for. Men who proved that patriotism and courage transcend race, that loyalty can't be measured by the color of skin, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who fight not just to win, but to be recognized as fully human. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team went for broke in the Vosges Mountains. They bet everything, their lives, their futures, their families' hopes, on the belief that extraordinary service could overcome ordinary prejudice. 800 casualties to save 211 men. 4 rescuers wounded or killed for every man saved. The mathematics were brutal. But the message was clear. Japanese Americans would not be defined by others' prejudice. They would define themselves through their actions. In the end, that's the legacy of the Lost Battalion rescue. Not the tactical details or the casualty statistics, but the inescapable truth that some of America's greatest heroes were the men it trusted least. The soldiers who proved their loyalty with blood while their families sat behind barbed wire. The warriors who fought for a nation that questioned their allegiance right up until they died defending it. If you found this story of loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of proving one's humanity compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. The story of World War II is filled with moments that reveal fundamental truths about courage, prejudice, and the long struggle toward justice. We'll continue to explore these pivotal moments in military history, the battles that changed not just the course of the war, but the course of human understanding. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on the battlefield. They're won in the slow, painful recognition that courage knows no race, that loyalty transcends ancestry, and that sometimes the best of us are the ones we wrong the most.